The screams of her child still echoed in her ears, even as the fire consumed everything. Ilara Voss could barely breathe, her lungs seared by the acrid smoke curling from the wreckage of her home. The ground trembled beneath her as the Zyrex Dominion's warships loomed above, their dark metallic hulls swallowing the twilight sky. She clutched the jagged edge of a broken wall, her mind refusing to process what had just happened. Lena was gone. They had taken her. The Zyrex soldiers had stormed their settlement with ruthless efficiency, sweeping through the remnants of human civilization like a plague. Their exoskeletal armor gleamed under the pale, artificial glow of their drop pods, their black, multi-limbed forms moving with cold precision. Humanity had once fought them, once resisted, but that war had ended in fire and surrender. Now, humans were nothing more than subjects, livestock to be harvested, workers to be enslaved. And yet, Ilara had hoped that she and Lena could disappear into fringes of the occupied zones, living out their days in obscurity. A foolish dream. She could still hear Lena's voice, small and trembling, calling for her as the Zyrex enforcers dragged her away. Ilara had fought. Oh, she had fought, but they had struck her down effortlessly, as if she were nothing more than a nuisance. A Zyrex commander had sneered at her as she lay bleeding on the ground, his mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement. "She will serve a greater purpose," he had said in perfect, hollow-toned English before turning away. Then the flames had come, engulfing the settlement as the Zyrex purged what remained. Now, Ilara stood amidst the ruins, her fists clenched so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. Grief and rage war within her, but one thought burned through it all. They think I am nothing. Let them believe it. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stumbled forward, mind racing. The Zyrex had not simply taken Lena. They had a purpose, a reason. They did not waste resources, and they certainly did not take human children for sport. Ilara had spent years studying them during the war. She knew their methods, their cold pragmatism. The Dominion did not capture civilians unless they served a function. If Lena was alive, it was because they needed something from her. And that meant she had time, however little, to get her back. The realization sent a pulse of clarity through her grief. Her training, long buried under years of forced peace, stirred like a beast waking from slumber. She was not just a mother. She was a strategist, a survivor, and she would burn the Zyrex to the ground to get her daughter back. She forced herself to move, picking through the wreckage with sharp, calculated movements. She needed supplies, anything that could aid her. The Zyrex had left nothing of use, but the corpses of the fallen settlers told another story. She knelt beside one of the bodies, a man she had known only in passing. His rifle lay discarded beside him, useless now to him but vital to her. She pried it from his stiffening fingers, checking the charge. Nearly full. A rustling sound snapped her attention upward. She spun, rifle raised, finger poised on the trigger. A figure lurked in the shadows of collapsed structure, a man, human, with sharp eyes that gleamed even in the dim light. His clothes were tattered, his face smeared with soot, but there was an unmistakable wariness in his stance. Ilara did not lower the rifle. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man hesitated, then stepped forward, hands raised. "Jex," he said, voice low. "I saw what happened." Ilara's grip tightened. "And—" Jex exhaled slowly. "And I know where they're taking her." For a moment, the words did not register. Then a cold, electric shock jolted through her. "How?" Jex gave her a grim look. "Because they took my son last month." Her stomach clenched. "Is he alive?" A muscle in his jaw twitched. "I don't know, but I know where they transport the children." A long silence stretched between them. The rifle in Ilara's hands felt heavier. If Jex was lying, she would kill him. If he was telling the truth, then she couldn't afford to waste time. Finally, she lowered the gun. "Show me." Jex nodded, his expression unreadable. "Then we better move fast. Because once they reach the processing stations, there's no getting them back." Ilara didn't need convincing. She followed him into the night, leaving behind the smoldering ruins of her past. The air was thick with the scent of charred metal and damp earth, the remnants of past battles lost to time. Illyra moved like a shadow through the crumbling ruins, her steps careful, precise. Jex led the way, his posture tense, his eyes scanning the darkened landscape for any sign of movement. The Zyrex patrols were relentless, sweeping the wastelands with methodical precision, their eerie, clicking voices carrying through the stillness. Illyra kept her rifle close, her grip firm but steady. Her mind was a battlefield, warring between urgency and control. Lena was out there, somewhere in the clutches of an enemy that viewed humanity as little more than an infestation to be managed. The thought made her stomach coil with fury. But rage alone wouldn't save her daughter. She needed to be smart, tactical, the way she had been before the war ended, and survival had become her only goal. Jex paused near the remains of collapsed structure, motioning for her to stay low. She crouched beside him, her gaze following us to a distant ridge where a Zyrex transport hovered above the ground, its sleek, insect-like frame reflecting the faint glow of the twin moons. Soldiers moved in disciplined formation, escorting prisoners toward the vessel's open bay. Children. Illyra's breath hitched. She counted at least a dozen, their small figures bundled in ragged clothes, their hands bound in restraints that pulsed with a dull, unnatural glow. Lena wasn't among them. She exhaled slowly, forcing the wave of despair down. If they were still moving children, then the processing stations weren't full yet. There was still time. Jex leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. They move them in waves. Smaller settlements first, then to the main transport hub. If your daughter was taken last night, she's still in transit. Illyra's eyes never left the scene below. Where's the hub? Jex hesitated, deep in the Zyrex stronghold. You can't go in alone. I'm not asking permission. Jex exhaled sharply. I'm saying you'll die before you even get close. He nodded toward the transport. That ship is heading there. If we get inside, we can find her. The risk was astronomical. The transport will be crawling with Zyrex soldiers, their biotech enhancements giving them an edge in strength and speed. But Illyra wasn't interested in a fair fight. She was interested in winning. She checked her weapon. How do we get on board? Jex gave her a wary look. I have an idea. You're not going to like it. She almost laughed. There wasn't much left to like about any of this. Minutes later, they crouched near the edge of the ridge, watching the last of prisoners being loaded. The Zyrex had no reason to suspect anyone would be reckless enough to approach their vessel. That arrogance was their weakness. Jex pointed to a storage bay near the lower section of the ship, where Zyrex soldiers were securing supplies, weapon caches, rations, and stasis pods. If we can slip inside before the bay doors seal, we ride with the cargo. Illyra studied the entrance, calculating the timing. And when we're inside, we stay hidden until we reach the hub. Then we find your daughter. Illyra tightened her jaw. It was a terrible plan. It was also their only plan. They moved fast, keeping to the shadows, their footsteps silent against the broken terrain. The Zyrex soldiers barely glanced toward the supply bay as they finished securing the last of the cargo. Jex gestured toward a stack of supply crates, their surfaces slick with condensation from the stasis units within. Now! They sprinted. Illyra slipped into the bay just as the last crate was being pushed inside, her body folding into the narrow space between containers. Jex followed, tucking himself into the opposite corner. The doors began to seal, locking them into darkness. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the ship lurched, rising from the ground with a hum of energy. Illyra pressed her back against the metal, her heartbeat steady but fierce. They were in. The easy part was over. Now came the real fight. The ship's interior was filled with a low, rhythmic hum of Zyrex technology, a sound that sent an unwelcome chill down Illyra's spine. She had spent years on battlefields littered with the wreckage of their ships, studying the way their biotech melded with metal, the way their systems pulsed like living organisms rather than machines. Being inside one of their vessels now was like stepping into the belly of a beast. Jex shifted slightly, his voice a mere breath. We wait until they start unloading. Then we move. Illyra's muscles ached with the effort of staying still, but she forced herself into silence. Time passed in agonizing slowness. She listened to the faint, clicking conversations of the Zyrex soldiers beyond the cargo hold, their movements precise, rehearsed. Then footsteps. Sharp. Approaching. Ilara gripped her rifle, her breath steady. The door to the cargo bay slid open with a hiss, pale blue light spilling into the space. A Zyrex enforcer stepped inside, its elongated head tilting slightly as it scanned the crates. It moved with eerie grace, the biotech veins beneath its armor pulsing faintly with each breath. Ilara remained perfectly still. The enforcer's gaze swept past her, lingering just long enough to send her pulse hammering against her ribs. Then, without a sound, it turned and exited, the door sealing shut once more. Jex exhaled slowly. That was close. Ilara didn't respond. She was already thinking ahead, calculating their next move. They had made it onto the ship, but the hardest part was yet to come, because soon they would be inside the Zyrex stronghold, and there would be no turning back. The ship's descent was smoother than expected, a silent glide that sent a faint vibration to the cargo bay floor. Ilara remained crouched behind the crates, her breathing steady, her grip firm on the rifle. Jex was beside her, his expression tense but focused. The air inside the ship was stale, thick with the synthetic scent of Zyrex biotech, an unsettling mix of sterile metal and something almost organic. She forced the discomfort away. A sharp mechanical hiss signaled their arrival. The cargo bay doors began to unlock, thin beams of blue light seeping through the edges as the ship's systems prepared for docking. Outside, the Zyrex stronghold loomed, an enormous monolith of dark metal and pulsating alien circuitry, its towering spires cutting against the storm-filled sky. Thunder rumbled distantly, but no rain fell. The air here was different, heavier, charged with an unnatural energy. The ship shuddered as it settled into place. Then came the sounds of movement. Zyrex enforcers barked clipped orders in their guttural, clicking language, directing the unloading process. The crates around Ilara shifted slightly as mechanical arms began pulling them from the ship's hold. Jex nudged her. We move when they're distracted. Ilara gave a tight nod. One by one, the cargo containers were removed, the Zyrex working with calculated efficiency. Moments later, a sharp chime echoed through the hold. Some kind of command signal. The enforcers left, their heavy footsteps fading down the corridor. Ilara and Jex slipped out from behind the crates, moving low and fast. The cargo bay was massive, a labyrinth of stacked supplies, weapons, and stasis units. Overhead, surveillance drones hovered in silent patrols, their sleek forms rotating in precise, sweeping arcs. Jex pointed toward a narrow access corridor. That leads deeper inside. They moved swiftly, pressing against the walls, avoiding open spaces. Every step was measured, deliberate. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and the mission was over. Ilara's mind was a machine of constant calculations. The Zyrex stronghold was built for efficiency, not security. Their arrogance was their weakness. They believed humans were too broken to resist, too weak to infiltrate their territory. She was going to prove them wrong. They reached a junction where the corridor split into 3 paths. Jex swiped a stolen datapad over a control panel, the screen flickering with alien script before translating into something they could read. Processing Center, Level 3. Ilara's stomach twisted. She forced herself to breathe. Lena was close. They moved toward the lift, a towering structure of black metal and pulsing, translucent veins. The Zyrex technology was seamless, alive in a way that unsettled her. The lift had no buttons, no visible controls. Only a scanner, shifting in color like an organic eye. Jex swore under his breath. Biometric lock. Ilara's mind raced. They needed a Zyrex life signature to activate it, and there was only one way to get that. She turned back down the corridor, rifle raised. Jex grabbed her wrist. You're insane. Ilara's voice was cold. We don't have time. She moved before it could stop her, pressing into the shadows, waiting. She knew the patrol schedules, the way the Zyrex moved in precise, rotating shifts. It was only a matter of seconds before. There, a lone enforcer approached, its elongated head tilting slightly as it scanned the area. Its bio-armor pulsed faintly, reading the environment. It sensed something was off. Too late. Ilara struck fast. She lunged from the darkness, driving her blade deep into the creature's throat before it could react. The Zyrex spasmed, its mandibles twitching in a soundless death rattle as she pulled the knife free, black fluid oozing from a wound. She caught its collapsing body before it could make a sound. Jex exhaled. "Remind me not to get on your bad side." She ignored him, dragging the corpse toward the scanner. Pressing the Zyrex's still warm hand against the interface, she held her breath as the scanner flickered, then turned green. Access granted. The lift door slid open. They stepped inside, the door sealing behind them. The descent was silent, but Alara could feel her pulse hammering against her ribs. Then the doors parted. The processing center stretched before them, a massive chamber of sterile white light and cold machinery. Rows of containment pods lined the walls, each one filled with a sleeping child, human children. Her stomach twisted into knots. She scanned the rows frantically. Where was Lena? Jex grabbed her shoulder. There. Alara's breath caught. Lena. Her daughter was strapped to a vertical examination table, thin cables running from her small wrist to the pulsating Zyrex machinery embedded in the walls. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. Alara moved before she could think, sprinting across the room, her knife cutting through the restraints in swift, precise motions. Lena stirred, a weak murmur escaping her lips. "Lena," Alara whispered, brushing the child's hair from her face. Her daughter's eyelids fluttered. Then a shrill alarm exploded through the chamber. Alara's stomach dropped. Jex cursed. "We tripped something." A deep, inhuman voice echoed to the chamber speakers. Intruders detected. Doors hissed open. Zyrex enforcers poured into the room, their weapons raised. Alara shielded Lena with her body, her mind already working through every possible outcome. There was no time to run, no time to hide. They had to fight. Alara's mind sharpened into cold clarity. The Zyrex enforcers moved with brutal efficiency, forming a perimeter around the processing chamber. Their bio-armor pulsed in unison, a grotesque, synchronized rhythm like a single organism preparing to strike. Jex had his weapon raised, but Alara knew the truth. This was not a fight they could win through sheer force. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in the belly of an enemy's stronghold. But there was one advantage left. She still had something to lose. Lena stirred against her chest, her small fingers twitching as her consciousness fought to return. Alara cradled her daughter's fragile form, feeling the faint rise and fall of her breaths. The cables were severed, but she didn't know what the Zyrex had done to her, what horrors had already begun within her tiny body. One of the enforcers stepped forward, its mandibles clicking in precise, deliberate patterns. Its voice was an unnatural distortion of human speech, like a machine attempting to mimic emotion. "Surrender. The child is no longer yours." Alara's grip tightened on her rifle. Her finger twitched near the trigger, but she didn't fire. "Not yet." Jex shifted beside her. "We need a way out." Alara's mind worked furiously. The Zyrex didn't take prisoners unless they had a use for them. That meant they wouldn't kill her outright. They needed Lena. And if they needed Lena... She turned toward the main control panel at the center of the chamber, her heart pounding. Zyrex technology was alive in ways that human machines were not. The processing center wasn't just a laboratory. It was a neural hub connected to the Dominion's greater network. And if Alara could access it... She adjusted her grip on her knife, shifting Lena's weight to one arm. "Cover me." Jex didn't hesitate. The moment she moved, he opened fire. The blast of energy rounds lit up the chamber, searing through the sterile white light. Zyrex enforcers reacted instantly, their bodies twisting in unnatural precision, dodging some of the shots, absorbing others with their armor. The air filled with a high-pitched screech of their return fire. Alara sprinted toward the control panel, dodging past the rows of stasis pods, her feet barely making a sound against the metal floor. A plasma bolt grazed her shoulder. Heat flared against her skin, but she didn't stop. Reaching the panel, she slammed Lena's severed cables into the main port. The system flickered, resisting her touch, but she had spent years deciphering Zyrex systems during the war. They functioned on bioelectric frequency locks, only responsive to their own kind. Ilera grabbed the nearest enforcer's still twitching corpse and pressed its clawed hand against the interface. The system responded. A shriek of warning howled through the chamber as the processing unit recognized the forced access. The walls pulsed erratically, the Zyrex hive mind reacting to the breach. Ilera's fingers flew across the console. She didn't need full control, just enough. Enough to override the security measures, enough to trigger chaos. She bypassed encryption, disabled containment locks, and then she found it. A single command buried deep within the system. Neural link severance. Ilera hit the override. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, the entire facility screamed. Zyrex enforcers convulsed where they stood, their limbs seizing, mandibles clicking erratically. The synchronized pulsing of their armor fractured, breaking apart in chaotic bursts of light. The hive mind was collapsing. The neural link that connected them, that bound them as a singular entity, was severed. Ilera turned, her heart pounding. Jex stared at the writhing enforcers, disbelief flickering across his face. "What did you do?" Ilera pulled Lena closer, feeling the rapid heartbeat against her own. Gave them what they feared most. The Zyrex were powerful because they were one, because they functioned in perfect unity. Without that link, they were individuals, isolated, directionless, vulnerable. Jex didn't ask questions. He grabbed Lena's other arm and hauled her into his arms. "We need to move." Ilera sprinted toward the exit, dodging past the enforcers still spasming on the floor. The alarms were still wailing, but the facility was in chaos. Patrols scrambled aimlessly, their cohesion shattered. They reached the lift. Ilera slammed the override, and the door slid open. They piled inside, Lena cradled between them, and the lift shot upward, its humming ascent the only sound in the world. Ilera's pulse thundered in her ears. They had done the impossible. They had stolen from the Zyrex, broken their perfect system. But it wasn't over. The stronghold was still a fortress. Even with the enforcers disoriented, they wouldn't stay that way forever. And the moment the hive mind reestablished itself, they would come. The lift jolted to a stop. The doors hissed open to reveal the loading bay. Their stolen transport ship was still docked, its engines humming idly. Jex pulled Lena closer. "I'll get her inside. Cover me." Ilera turned, raising her rifle. Zyrex soldiers staggered to the halls behind them, some regaining their balance, others still malfunctioning. She fired. Plasma bolts tore through the air, cutting down the first enforcer before it could react. The second lunged toward her, mandibles snapping. She twisted, driving her knife into its throat. Jex was nearly at the ship. The boarding ramp lowered. The engines roared to life. Ilera sprinted, her lungs burning. The remaining enforcers charged after her, but they were slower, sluggish without their hive mind coordination. She leapt onto the ramp just as the ship lifted from the platform, the stronghold shrinking beneath them. Jex pulled her inside, slamming the hatch shut. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, silence fell. Ilera collapsed beside Lena, brushing sweat-soaked hair from her daughter's face. "Lena," she whispered. Her daughter's eyes fluttered open. And then, soft, barely audible, Lena spoke. "Mom." Ilera's breath caught. Relief hit her like a physical force, stronger than any battle, any war. She pulled Lena into her arms, holding her as if she might vanish. Jex slumped against the wall, exhaling sharply. "I can't believe we're alive." Ilera let out a breathless, shaking laugh. "Neither can I." But they were. They had done the impossible. The Zyrex had taken everything from her, and she had taken it back.